Somewhere in an underground command center, a man who controls one of the most militarized ideological movements on Earth has reportedly signed an order, not a declaration, not a warning, an order, a standing directive that says, if I die, fire everything. Read that again. Not if we are attacked, not if our cities burn, if I die. That is not the decision of a man in control. That is the decision of a system that has run out of options. And the terrifying part is not that one man made that call. The terrifying part is that the system surrounding him made it inevitable. And that same system is not unique to Iran. It is the same machine that collapsed the British Empire, the same machine that turned Weimar Germany into a furnace, the same machine that shattered the Soviet Union from the inside out. And right now, in slow motion, the same machine is running its final calculations on the global order you were born into. This is not a theory. This is a mechanism. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Most people look at this moment and see chaos. They see irrational leaders, unpredictable decisions, random violence. They reach for explanations rooted in personality. He's crazy. They are fanatics. He made a mistake. But chaos is what the pattern looks like from inside it. Step outside it, and what you see is not chaos. What you see is a machine executing its final stage with mathematical precision. The machine has 4 movements, not stages, not steps. Movements, the way a symphony has movements, each one building on the last, each one making the next one inevitable. The first movement is consolidation. A regime, an empire, a financial order builds its power. It centralizes authority. It creates institutions, doctrines, loyalties. On the surface, it looks like stability. It feels like permanence. But consolidation has a hidden cost. The same rigidity that holds power together also makes the system brittle. It suppresses the internal contradictions that could have been absorbed gradually. It tells itself that control is the same as strength. It is not. Control is borrowed strength and the interest compounds. The second movement is overextension. Power, once consolidated, always reaches beyond its sustainable edge. It has to. A system that does not expand faces internal pressure it cannot redirect, so it expands. Territorially, financially, ideologically. It makes commitments it cannot fully honor. It borrows against a future it cannot fully guarantee. It builds alliances that carry obligations. It exports its ideology or its currency or its military presence to places that require constant maintenance. And quietly, beneath the language of strength, the cost of maintaining the illusion of strength begins to exceed the actual capacity of the system. The gap between what the system projects and what the system can sustain is where collapse is born. The third movement is the feedback loop. This is where the machine accelerates. External rivals sense the weakness. Internal dissent becomes harder to suppress. The economy strains. The currency wobbles. Legitimacy fractures at the edges. The system responds the only way it knows how. By tightening control, escalating rhetoric, doubling down on the posture of strength. But every move to tighten control creates new pressure points. Every escalation requires the next escalation to maintain credibility. And the system enters a loop where the cure and the disease are the same thing. Reform feels like surrender. Compromise looks like collapse. The leaders are not irrational. They are cornered by the logic of their own system. The fourth movement is the release. This is the part people call the crisis, the war, the collapse. But by the time it arrives, it is not a crisis. It is a conclusion. The accumulated pressure of decades finally exceeds the containment capacity of the system, and it releases. Not because anyone chose catastrophe, because the system left no other exit. The final orders, the final wars, the final currency collapses are not aberrations. They are the exhaust of a machine that could no longer hold the pressure inside. Now watch what happens when you apply this to history with your eyes open. In 1913, the British Empire controlled roughly a quarter of the Earth's land surface. It ran the global financial system through the gold standard. Its navy made the rules of the seas. The consolidation phase had been running for 200 years, and from inside it, from the perspective of a London banker or a Westminster politician, it felt permanent. It felt like the natural order of things. But the overextension had already happened. Commitments across Africa, entanglements across Asia, the weight of the Middle East, a web of European alliances that had been woven so tight that a single assassination in Sarajevo in the summer of 1914 would pull the entire structure into a war that no single leader actually wanted at the scale it became. 4 years, 17 million dead. And at the end of it, Britain had technically won and was financially broken. The pound was hollowed. The empire was held together by inertia and propaganda. The feedback loop had begun. By 1945, there was nothing left to hold. The colonies did not choose independence because the British suddenly became enlightened. The empire released its grip because the system could no longer afford to hold it. The pressure inside became greater than the pressure keeping it together. Decolonization is not a story of moral progress. It is a story of a machine reaching the end of its containment capacity. The release was called history. The people in the blast radius called it something else. Now go further back. Weimar Germany, 1919. A democratic republic being assembled on the rubble of a defeated empire, under the terms of a treaty that demanded the impossible. Economic reparations that exceeded Germany's ability to pay without destroying its own economy. The setup was a trap. The leaders knew it. The economists said so out loud. But the system was already in motion. To pay the reparations, the government printed money, slowly at first, then faster. By 1923, a loaf of bread cost 100 billion marks. Wheelbarrows of currency for a single meal, the savings of an entire generation erased in months. The social contract between the state and its citizens did not bend. It snapped. And when a society's trust in its own currency collapses, what fills the vacuum is not reason. It is rage looking for a container. That container arrived wearing a specific ideology, and the rest is the most documented catastrophe in modern history. One man, or a machine that made one particular outcome structurally inevitable given enough accumulated pressure? Ask the question seriously. The Soviet Union makes it undeniable. For 40 years after World War II, the USSR projected an image of invincible ideological strength. It had the bomb, it had the satellites, it had the empire from Berlin to Vladivostok. From inside it, Soviet citizens and Soviet leadership alike lived inside a reality where the system felt permanent. The overextension happened quietly. Proxy wars in Angola, insurgencies in Southeast Asia, the drain of Afghanistan, a war that was supposed to be over in 6 months and ran for a decade, bleeding men and resources the system could not replace. Underneath, the command economy had stopped working. The gap between official statistics and actual production was papered over with ideology. By the time Gorbachev took power, the feedback loop was already terminal. He did not weaken the Soviet Union. He inherited a system that had been hollowing itself out for 20 years. The release came in 1991, 15 countries, overnight. Right now, Iran's revolutionary ideology began consolidating in 1979. The revolutionary state has since extended its reach across Lebanon through Hezbollah, across Syria through direct military support, across Iraq through Shia militia networks, across Yemen through the Houthis. A regional empire run not through conventional military occupation, but through ideological and financial networks operating in the shadow economy, funded through channels that sanctions cannot fully close. The overextension is real. The domestic economy has been under compounding strain for years. Inflation, currency devaluation, youth unemployment, periodic mass protests, the gap between what the regime projects outward and what it can sustain internally has been widening for a long time. The feedback loop is visible. Hardliners have consolidated control domestically precisely because the system can no longer tolerate dissent. The nuclear program is advanced enough that it functions as an existential deterrent and bargaining chip simultaneously. External strikes on Iranian-linked targets from Syria to Baghdad to Lebanon are narrowing the space for proxy engagement without direct escalation. The cost of restraint, internally politically, has become higher than the cost of escalation. That is the signal. That is the machine entering its final movement. When a supreme leader reportedly authorizes a standing order for mass retaliation upon his own death, that is the system announcing in operational language what its logic has already concluded. Restraint is no longer survivable. The trigger no longer matters. It could be an Israeli strike, a covert operation, an internal coup, a health crisis. Whatever the trigger, the standing order means the machine has already made the decision. It is waiting for the input. And here is the part most people miss. This is not only Iran's machine. The post-World War II global order is running the same pattern. The consolidation happened between 1945 and 1971, Bretton Woods, the IMF, NATO, the United Nations, American military supremacy, dollar hegemony, a system that genuinely stabilized large parts of the world for several decades. But consolidation carries its hidden cost, and the cost here was massive centralization of financial and military power in institutions that could not adapt without threatening the stability they were built to provide. The overextension has been visible since the 1970s. The Nixon shock in 1971 severed the dollar from gold, which was not a reform. It was an admission that the system's commitments exceeded its reserves. Global debt has since expanded to levels that would have been considered science fiction in 1950. Military commitments span the globe. Supply chains were stretched across dozens of countries in pursuit of efficiency, eliminating the redundancy that resilience requires. Every efficiency gain was borrowed against future stability. The feedback loop is the news you're watching right now. Nations rearming at speeds not seen since the 1930s. Sanctions being deployed as financial weapons, accelerating the very decoupling they were meant to punish. Inflation that central banks cannot fully control without triggering the recession their political systems cannot absorb. Proxy wars, multiplying faster than diplomatic frameworks can address them. Nuclear doctrines being revised publicly in real time. These are not random events. These are pressure gauges all moving in the same direction. This is the point where someone always says, but this time is different. Technology, globalization, mutual assured destruction, the economic interdependence that makes war unthinkable. Technology did not save Rome from overextension. And the most sophisticated road and aqueduct system the ancient world had ever seen did not halt the feedback loop. The British Empire had railroads and telegraphs and industrial production that dwarfed anything that came before it. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons and space technology and a massive military apparatus. None of it changed the pattern. Technology amplifies the speed and scale of both stability and collapse. It does not change the mechanics. It does not change what happens when pressure accumulates faster than it can be released through reform. What this means for you is simple, and it is serious. You cannot stop the machine. That is not defeatism. That is the recognition that systemic pressure at this scale is not resolved by individual action or electoral politics or market sentiment. The machine responds to pressure gradients, not intentions. What you can do is understand which stage of the pattern the system you live inside is in. You can reduce your dependence on centralized points of failure. You can diversify what you hold, what you know, and who you know it with. You can stop anchoring your financial, professional, and personal stability to a single institution, a single currency, a single geopolitical assumption. Because the assumption that the current order is the permanent order is exactly what people in 1913 believed, what people in 1929 believed, what people in 1989 believed the week before the wall came down. The standing order has reportedly been signed. The machine is in its final movement. The question is not whether the pressure releases. The question is where it releases first, and what you have built your life around when it does. The pattern is not a prediction. It is a warning written in the wreckage of every empire that came before, and unlike them, you have the advantage of being able to read it before the release comes. That window does not stay open forever.